Britain has a wealth of wildlife, many of which inhabit our waterways, but one that's always fascinated me is fish. In particular, freshwater fish, but they often take a back seat with our other wildlife, and I aim to rectify this. My name is Jack Perks, and I'm a natural history photographer and cameraman obsessed with fish. For the past year, I've travelled across Britain, filming the huge array of species that live in our rivers, streams, lakes and ponds, successfully filming over 40 species breeding, feeding and even fighting. But now I'm going to be taking you on a journey from the Scottish lochs to the Midlands canals to discover species rarely seen and tackle some of the issues our fish face beneath the waterline. Currently in the UK, we have 54 species of freshwater fish in our waterways, but few are more mysterious than the eel, which travels to the Sargasso Sea to spawn and then takes a 3-year journey back to European rivers. I went to the River Severn in Gloucestershire to talk to Andrew Kerr of the Sustainable Eel Group about their future.
The eel is really not understood. Most scientists believe that the biggest issues are in the oceans. The currents, they come and they go, the temperature changes, the food, the amount of food. We don't really know what the European eel eats in the Atlantic Ocean. Once they reach the continental shelf and the rivers of Europe, we then have the major issue of barriers. That's the fish trying to get past the flood defences and into the rivers, the brooks, the wetlands the other side, so that they can grow up into bigger eels. And then of course they have the return journey, when they have to come back down the river system, and there are tens of thousands of water pumps and 25,000 hydropower stations, all of which mince these big eels up. At this stage in their life, they are incredibly precious. A big female is probably carrying 2 million eggs, so she represents 2 million tiny little fish. And then another major issue is the loss of wetland habitat that's gone on for centuries and centuries, and we've lost 80% of our wetlands in the last 200 years. So the amount of habitat that the eel actually has to occupy is greatly diminished. We've seen a decline in the adult population to about 25-30% of its historic average, but the real crisis has come with the babies, the young ones, the elvers as we call them here on the Severn. We've seen a 30 or 40 year period of decline. But since then we've had 5 years of improvement. Now again this year we've had so many that the fishermen and the collectors are saying it's the best year since the early 80s. But if we leave them the wrong side of these sort of impenetrable barriers, then they'll just be eaten by Zanders and all the other fish, the pike, the otters, and they won't do anything for rebuilding the population. Just the other side of here, we have got a nature reserve created by the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust that stretches on this side and the other side of the Severn to well over 1,000 hectares. Those nature reserves need a good population of elvers to turn into big eels, and that sort of barrier is stopping this happen. It's not only happening here, it's happening all the way up the Severn, it's happening all the way across Europe, and as I frequently say, it's like Hitler's Atlantic Wall if you're an eel. You can't get through it.
Helping the eels to get over these barriers is one of the main ways to increase survival rates, along with habitat management. This can be achieved with an eel pass. The eel pass is put around a weir or other obstruction and allows the eels to wriggle through safely further upstream. Andrew is part of an organisation who are tackling this problem, and I asked him to tell me a little bit more about what they do.
SEG is a coming together of scientists, conservationists like myself, and the progressives from the industry. We've come together and united around an agenda for sustainability. The scientists to do more scientific research work, to understand the mysteries of the eel, the conservationists to do important things like this, unblock the migratory pathways, and then the industry itself is adopting sustainable practices so that fewer fish are wasted and as many as possible are caught in sensitive ways and then moved for restocking. Here on the Severn, for example, last year, 20 million fish were caught and 15 million were moved and restocked to other places in Britain or in Europe where they don't have an overrun like the one we get on the Severn. And yes, if we can use those precious eels intelligently and get them to grow on in their wetland habitats, yes, we can see a recovery. But nobody's talking of a recovery yet. And we certainly won't get it if we don't use them more preciously and more sensitively.
So we're waiting for nightfall now for the elvers to run. So in the meantime, I'm just going to enjoy a pint of cider with Andrew and wait for nightfall. Cheers.
To the elvers.
To the elvers. With the tide coming, it brought the elvers upriver. The elver fishermen set their nets in hope of catching some of the baby eels. Although they do take some to be sold, they donate a large proportion of their catch to be restocked into lakes and rivers all over the UK, which would otherwise perish in the Severn. It's an example of a sustainable way of fishing, but also helping their intended quarry. As the night went on, we did indeed catch many elvers, into the thousands, though by the River Severn standards, it was still a poor night elvering.
This reserve's been here nearly 50 years. It's 2 years' time, it'll be our 50th birthday. And there's about 145 hectares, most of it covered in water.
So that's obviously of interest to me because I'm trying to promote all the fish species. And I know over this weekend you've actually done something where you've tried to find as many aquatic species as possible, haven't you? So.
Yes. We started last year at the beginning of our 50th anniversary with a Bioblitz, but we did it instead of 24 hours, we did 50 hours. And we enjoyed it so much we thought we'd do it again. So we did it last year in August, and then we thought we'd change the season as well and do it in May. Last year we looked a lot for mammal trapping, and this year we thought we'd like to give it a different theme each time, we've decided. And with 80% of the nature reserve being underwater, we thought what better than to find new aquatic species for the reserve.
Well, I remember I came along last year and I think your fish records were virtually nothing really.
Terrible.
And to say that the River Trent that runs at the back's got about 30 species in it, and I think in the day I found like 6 just with a net. So it's great that reserves are doing this, finding different species and whatnot. So, and did they get many new species on the recent one?
Well, our target last year and this year was to have more than 50 new species for the reserve, and last year we had about 99, and this year we've beaten the 50, and we did wonder, with the weather being not so great, if we'd be able to achieve that this year, but we have. Hundreds of species were recorded and well over 50 new ones for the reserve, and even a county record as well, so it's been marvellous.
Great. Well, I'm actually going to see if I can find a species that's quite endemic to Nottinghamshire now, so I'm going to just walk off and see if we can find those. So I'm at the back of the nature reserve now, and we're along the banks of the River Trent, the third longest river in the country. And it has a bit of a secret. It's one of the only rivers in the country that has the spined loach. Now, if you're scratching your head because you've never heard of that fish, I wouldn't be surprised. They're not a very common fish nationally, but the River Trent is probably the best river in the country to find them. And here at Attenborough Nature Reserve, I'm going to see if I can scoop one up with my net. They're really unique fish. They actually are one of the few fish that can breathe air. They'll come up in really highly polluted water. So we're just going to see if we can scoop one up now. There are actually 2 species of loach in the country. You've got the stone loach, which are fairly common on small gravelly streams, and then the spine loach, which is slightly smaller. And oh, right on cue, there's a little guy. Okay, we'll just put him in the tank. There we go. So you might wonder why I'd get so excited over just such a small fish. But it's interesting, on such a large reserve like this, these fish were only recorded last year by myself, and that was more of a fluke just netting around. And reserves can have all kinds of hidden treasures such as these, if you just look for them. With Spined Loach, because their mouths are so small, anglers would never catch them. And because of their habit of living in silt, most people would never see them, so they get very little publicity. But they're amazing little fish. The markings on them are stunning, despite their size. I mean, they get no bigger than your little finger in general. They're actually a UK BAP species as well, so they've got protection plans under them. When you think that the minnows, the sticklebacks, the loach, these provide food for kingfishers, grebes, otters, all these lovely species that we like to see when we're sitting in the hides, they all feed on these little guys, so it's important to protect them. So it's fantastic what Attenborough Nature Reserve have done over this weekend, doing the Bioblitz and looking at all the species underwater. It's also great that freshwater fish are being put first on a nature reserve, and this is something that I would really love other nature reserves around the country to do. There are simple steps nature reserves can do to help our freshwater fish. One such way is putting up charts in hides. These can be small A4 size charts with just the common fish species in the nature reserve, and then when a bird catches them, like a grebe or a cormorant, people know what fish species they are. Other ways, if they have visitor centres, is having small fish tanks, putting species like sticklebacks, minnows, bullheads, and then that way people can see some of the fish that they just would never normally see. If nature reserves are feeling really adventurous, they could always do a raised pond. So these are ponds that are above ground level, they have a large see-through screen, clear water, and you fill them with native freshwater fish. This is a great way to show the public fish that they just wouldn't normally see in their natural habitat. You can put small feeding stations for the fish, which can be charged 20, 30, 40p, and they eventually pay for themselves. And it can be a great way to show off species that members of the public would just not normally see.
So I'm here at Loch Lomond in Scotland. At its widest point it's over 5 miles and at its deepest 600 feet. And I'm here to film one of Britain's rarest fish. Something I don't know a lot about, but I know a man that does.
The Powan's an interesting fish species for a bunch of reasons. One of them is that it's really quite rare in the British Isles. There's only 7 natural populations in the British Isles and only 2 in Scotland, one of them in Loch Lomond. They're heavily protected, so there's an interest in the species because of its high conservation value to Scotland, but more widely in Europe. It's also of interest to us as researchers because different populations have evolved in different directions. So different populations have evolved since the last ice age, when the fish migrated into freshwater following the retreat of the glaciers. And we can use this species as a model to tell us something about the evolutionary process, to tell us how the evolutionary process actually works. Powan populations are under threat, not just in the United Kingdom, but throughout its range, throughout Europe. Specifically in the United Kingdom, the populations are under threat from a bunch of different factors, most of them the effect of humans. So they're under pressure from new species being introduced into the relatively small number of places where they exist. They're also under pressure from changing water quality, discharge of things like eutrophying chemicals, nutrients being released into water bodies. Powan particularly are sensitive to changes in water quality caused by increase in nutrients. And of course other things as well. Traditional things that we've known about for a long time, such as acid rain, are potential problems. Because of their high conservation status, there are a number of actions that have been taken throughout the United Kingdom, but specifically in Scotland. Scottish Natural Heritage has initiated a programme of trying to create conservation refuge sites for the 2 populations of Powan which are native to Scotland. So we now have 4 conservation refuge sites where we know Powan have established as a conservation measure.
It's fantastic to see people in groups like Colin researching our freshwater fish and giving them the support that they really need.
canals provide a fantastic habitat for many species and a gateway from our countryside into our towns and cities. Going through urban areas, this often means that alien species find their ways into canals very easily. The UK doesn't suffer too badly from invasive fish, around about 14 species, from Wells catfish that can get well over £100 in the UK, to the topmouth gudgeon, tiny little species which is actually on the world's top 100 invasives. But today I'm on the canal here looking for a nocturnal predator that lurks in these murky waters, and I'm meeting a man who knows how to catch one. How you doing, Pat? You all right?
Good, thanks.
Yeah.
You?
Yeah, I'm good. Good. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
We haven't already guessed, I'm hoping to catch Zander today. That's my target species. And Matt, I suppose you're somewhat of an expert with Zander, having fished with them on the Severn and whatnot. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yeah, they're curious fish. They're not everyone's cup of tea. They've had a fairly villainous reputation over the years. They are a controversial species. They're a non-native species. And as someone who's very vocal about not stocking non-native species, it's perhaps surprising that I've developed this real admiration for the Zander, but I have.
Well, it's good that you mentioned they're non-natives. I mean, how did they get into the UK, I suppose, first, and then obviously here on the canal?
Well, that's a good question. I did actually research it, and you'll have to forgive me if my dates are slightly awry, but the first Zander came into the UK in 1848, and they were brought in from the continent to Woburn Abbey in Bedfordshire.
He's the guy who's responsible for quite a few invasives, isn't he? Grey squirrels and muntjacs and whatnot.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's got form. And, so he brought them into Woburn Abbey. After that, some of them were transferred into Longleat. I don't know whether that was concurrent, but it was certainly quite soon afterwards. And to Coombe Abbey, near Coventry.
Yeah.
Hence why we're fishing from here. It was many years later that the Environment Agency actually tried experimental stockings in the fens, and they put them into the drain system, which is something they probably regretted.
Yeah, put them in a big natural waterway. They're going to go nuts, aren't they? So.
Yeah. And then some of the Brummie lads took fish out of Coombe Abbey. They put them in the Severn. They put them in the Warwickshire Avon.
Yeah.
And they probably put them in the canals, but they would have found their way into these canals
They're
anyway,
all connected.
There's a lock system. So, you know, I mean, they're here and that's it. And as far as I'm concerned, they're a really good addition to the sport fishing family. Luckily, they've settled into our system quite well. And what I've noticed in the places I've fished for them is fairly soon after their introduction, there's no question they do kind of decimate local prey fish populations. But then nature takes over. And what I have noticed is that once the population settles down, the indigenous prey fish, particularly roach, do very, very well. The population becomes very healthy and strong, and you tend to get great roach fishing.
So why do you think that is then?
It's just natural selection. I mean, what happens is this predator comes in, it's a very efficient predator.
Yeah.
It starts to reduce the roach numbers. Nature's way then protects the roach by causing them to overbreed. Their numbers go back up, but of course the zander and the pike and the predatory fish pick off the more sickly, weak individuals in the shoal. So, you know, effectively what you're doing is you're kind of cleansing that group of fish. Yeah. So you're getting the best DNA. You're getting the survival of the fittest, Jack.
So I've been known to wet a line, Matt, but I'm no expert at fishing. So how are we going to catch these zander today?
Well, for most people, bait fishing is the way they go.
Right.
But I actually prefer to fish with lures, especially on a piece of water that I'm unfamiliar with. And I like to be able to explore the water. My experience tells me that probably the zander are going to be lying alongside these boats or possibly underneath them. They'll enjoy the cover of that. But it's a pretty simple technique. The great thing about fishing with lures is you can cover a lot of water. And what I've got here is a small weighted jig head.
Right.
That's only 5 grams in weight. And that's basically a kind of lead head, if you like, moulded onto a fairly large single hook. And then a variety of plastic lures, either small fish replicas. This is actually a little grub, with
Right,
two
yeah, I was going to
tails.
say, what does it replicate? I suppose it's...
Well, I suppose it might be a bit like a crayfish, but that's not the point really. It's just the movement and the vibration.
Just sets them off.
Yeah. They don't really take too good a look at it. If it looks vaguely edible and it gives out the right vibrations, they'll nail it.
I'll give it a go.
And they're very effective at doing that. But the main point to bear in mind with lure fishing is you're covering a lot of water. The key really is to find the speed of the retrieve. It's very cold at the moment, so they're not going to chase a lure at high speed. We're going to have to really comb the lure across the bottom and try and drop it onto a zander. And if we do that and get really close to one's face, then hopefully it'll have a bite at us.
Right, let's get one.
That didn't take long, Jack. It's a second cast, actually. Well, there you are. There's your zander.
What are the key features of this zander then?
Well, it's a predator, of course, and you'd expect it to have teeth. And look at these fangs at the front here. It looks a bit like Dracula. They're very sharp. They will puncture the prey fish, but they certainly ensure that once they've got hold of something, it doesn't come back out again. Next feature is the big eye. They've got extremely good low light vision. Zander, they can feed quite happily in water the colour of chocolate. Beautiful mottled coloration on this specimen. It's really well camouflaged from the prey fish and from any potential predators of its own, such as pike or any predatory birds. And then the most distinctive feature of them all, I think, the wonderful double dorsal fin. The perch-like spiky dorsal with its wonderful black bars, and behind it the grayling sail-like softer dorsal fin. It's a very, very unusual combination, and these fish are a bit like Marmite. You either love them or you hate them, and personally I love them. Well, of course, some people do eat these fish. I don't. I like to return them to the water in good condition. They're a fine sport fish, and with this fella here, I've got to say to him as I put him back in the water, thank you very much for making a difficult job seem really easy.
So it's really evident that Matt's passionate about zander. The UK spends billions on getting rid of invasive species, particularly things like signal crayfish and mink, which cause untold damage. I think with zander, the jury's still out. I mean, obviously they shouldn't be here, and in waterways like this, they can have negative effects, but nature finds a way, and certainly they've been in this canal for a fair time now, and there's lots of other species still abundant, so maybe more research needs to be done to find out if zander do cause problems. Certainly with any invasive species in waterways, they're very difficult to remove once they're here. So I think it's more a case of learning to live with zander than eradicating them.
Right, I'm going to watch how you do it, because you keep getting all the big ones.
Most of them.
I don't think there can be many left.
Unless I sneak through somewhere.
No, I think you've caught all the fish in here, haven't you?
No, you just have to go fight them out.
Yep. If we look in those trays, I bet they've full to the brim by now, aren't they? You got a fish? What have you got? What have you got? That's a damselfly larvae. So events like this are fantastic, getting kids involved with nature. Looking around, they're all here with the Wildlife Watch Group. Most wildlife trusts have one of these, and it's all about getting kids out, getting them involved. There are certain things like taking them to hides and things, watching the wildlife. They can get a little bit bored, you know, kids have a short attention span. But when they're actually playing around in the water, scooping up, catching small fish, we're getting things like bullheads today, sticklebacks. One of the kids is catching stone loach left, right and centre. They're absolutely having a ball, so it's fantastic. And we need to get these kids involved. Get your nieces, your brothers, your children, get them out, get them searching for stuff. Freshwater fish are something that kids, even a few of the adults don't know much about, so it's great today showing them what some of the fish are in this river. This project's been fantastic. I mean, I've been so fortunate going to places that I never thought I'd be able to visit up and down the UK. I've had huge support for this project from both the angling community and the wildlife community, really getting involved, taking me out to places, showing me the special spots. So I've really enjoyed it, and I really hope this film encourages you to go out along your waterways and go and see what's lurking down there. And if you're feeling really brave, get your wellies on, and jumping like we are today, and see if you can find some fish as well. There he goes.